Food labels, that's what we're talking about. You're like, hey, where'd you go? I'm behind the camera. I just didn't flip it around so you can see my head, give you a break if you've been watching some of the videos already. Just shout out, by the way, I put up a post about a poll, excuse me. If you're interested in a certain area, rank it. I'm asking for your input on what you want to hear more about on this site. I'm happy to provide it. Why food labels? Well, keep in mind that diet is your diet, noun, is a behavior. And so if you expect to change your behavior over time, that requires awareness. Anything we do in order to move us from the stages of behavior change is awareness. You can say, I'm fine, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor says your cholesterol is high. Well, you just created some awareness about your health. That could drive decisions. And a food label is a tool to drive good decision making. Okay? So I'm not really sure how you can, not understand how to read a food label and be successful changing your diet in particular. Some of you may already be experts in this, and you may want to skip it. You might also find, though, if you hang in there, maybe there's some things about this food label you didn't realize. The other part of this is, just a little story about my own journey with, the power of food labels. Is I loved macaroni and cheese for many, many years. Even after I started taking nutrition classes as a college athlete, did all those things, and I purposely avoided the food label on macaroni and cheese because I enjoyed it. And it was years ago I finally flipped it over the box and read the food label. And let's just say that I've only eaten it, I think, maybe 2 or 3 times in the last 5 years because of that. The reason? Because I know what's in it now. I knew it was bad, but until I saw the actual numbers, it didn't motivate me to change. And this is where food labels can also be beneficial. You start flipping over your favorite foods and realizing there's 2,200 milligrams of sodium in a particular TV dinner you're eating, and that is not a untrue statement. There are some that have that high of sodium. That might motivate you to change what you're eating, at least make a better dietary choice. And so, looking at these labels, flipping them over in a grocery store can help maybe drive better choices. Even if you don't necessarily eat a healthier quote-unquote food, if you eat a food that's a little bit better, we wouldn't categorize as healthy, but if you moved up from garbage to less garbage, that even is an accomplishment, right? So let's read this thing. I have this food here. I may have not eaten it already. It's not the most healthy choice you'll see, but it at least give you some idea how to read this thing. Had some really cool parts of it, which I think makes it even more interesting. So it was a bar of some sort. Start with this is a very important piece of information right here, serving size. And the food companies are really, ice cream is probably the biggest, lie ever, is you think, wow, I can eat one serving, and this is what serving is. This happens to be 210 calories for this whole package, but it's possible this package could have been broken down into 2 serving sizes, and you think, okay, 210 for the whole thing, not pay attention, eat the whole thing, and you actually ate 420 calories. Like I said, ice cream is terrible at that. If you look at the serving size of ice cream, it's like, come on, seriously? Nobody's going to eat that small of a serving potentially. And so we look at that, we might say, oh, it's only 150 calories, but we end up eating 4 servings of it. You have to multiply that times the servings, calories per serving. So don't neglect that part. I made that mistake with trail mix one time. I was eating this trail mix, and I was like, yeah, that's sweet, literally, and it was good, and it was, healthy, fat, and all these good things, and I was started to notice I was gaining a little bit of weight, and I was, what is going on? I had these in my office, I was just snacking on them, and I was an idiot and didn't realize that there was 2 servings in the packet, and so I was doubling my calories on these little packets once I got rid of them, my weight settled back down. So start with that. How many calories per serving, and then how many servings in the whole container, and I always like to figure out, what if I ate the whole thing, right? That way, if you do, you know exactly what you're getting into. Next panel part over here is, it'll give you a breakdown of the macros. So you can see total carbohydrates, and then fat, and then it has protein. Protein usually is just left as that. In this case, only 2 grams. Total carbohydrates is just that, all the carbohydrates that are in this particular food, and then it happens to break it down into fiber, and then this one does sugar, and then additional sugars. So you might have something called net carbs. Net carbs are the kind of thing of the energy carbs, and so we would subtract fiber out of that, and we'd get 36 grams of net carbs. This will also tell you have to do some subtraction to give you the amount of complex carbohydrates. So this had 20 grams of sugar, and then 2 grams of fiber, so you got 22 grams of non-complex carbohydrates, and that's considered a lot of times the healthier, slow-release type of carbohydrate. So you had 22 kind of not part of 38 grams, right? So you take 38 grams minus 22 and that gives you 16 grams of complex carbohydrate. So if you're evaluating a food, like you'll see a soda, right? It has all sugar. There's no fiber in it. And so there's no complex carbohydrates, there's no fiber. Obviously, that's just going to be all sugar. It's not the best carbohydrate that you could find. What you're looking for in terms of quality carbohydrate, and it depends on when you're going to use it, but you'd want a high complex, so the difference between the fiber and the sugar and the total. And then if you really wanted to make sure you're optimizing your energy, you'd want to keep the fiber down as well. Now, for health and weight loss, that fiber number, that thing should be high as possible. So you'll see this in fruit drinks, for example. You're like, yes, it's a fruit drink. It's got a piece of fruit on the front. Fantastic. And then you look at the fiber and there's like 1 gram. That thing's been stripped of all the benefits of fruit. So a fruit drink is nothing more than a fortified soda at that point. And so I would avoid it. Fruit drinks are one of the great lies in nutrition. Fruit is fine, but fruit in its natural habitat, in its natural form, has sugar in it, but it has a lot of fiber in it too, and that's what makes fruit okay. It turns it into, in a sense, a complex carbohydrate. It slows it down in the gut. Okay, so watch those fiber numbers. Like this one has a pretty bad fiber to sugar ratio here. Okay, it's not the worst one I've seen, certainly, but it's not great. And then these added sugars down here obviously are problematic. That's what we usually call refined sugars, right? That's not naturally found. But the reality is, if there's not a fiber to balance any of the sugar, it's going to be a food that you're probably going to limit. And it's going to be more of a workout or crappy carbohydrate, I would call it. Okay. Protein, like I said, 2 grams. Fat. All right. So you see a breakdown over here. Total fat 5 grams. Saturated fat none. And so we can, again, have to do some subtraction here to say, okay, well, the difference between 5 and 0 is 5. So that 5 grams is going to be from what we call healthier fat, polyunsaturated or monounsaturated fat. It's not listed on here. Okay, so this is a healthier fat food. Trans fat, we all know, is bad. But here's the issue with these numbers. If these numbers are below 1, you can put 0. So there's actually could be some trans fat in this. Could be 0.5 grams of trans fat in this, but they can list it as a 0. So, you know, when you're looking at foods and evaluate them, make sure that, you know, these numbers you're looking at, you're not just blindly following them. Understand that there's some food science and some politics behind them. These are good guides, and they can create some awareness. Certainly if this had like 15 grams of saturated fat, that would be something to avoid, right? You can see the sugar in this is pretty high. You can start to gather some information, but don't stake your life on these numbers being perfect, okay? But they are guides. Let's just keep that in mind. So this has healthier fat source, doesn't have any sat fat, and we assume no sat fat and trans fat. That's a good sign, so the fats in this is a little bit healthy. Cholesterol doesn't have any. There's a lot of debate about cholesterol in food. Does it even matter? It probably does. We want to keep that low in this particular example. The cholesterol in this food is 0. And then sodium, in terms of just general health, it's been lowered to be 1,500 milligrams or less per day. Any packaged food, processed food like this happens to be, will have sodium in it, right? I mean, like, you think, oh, I'm going to eat this packaged deli meat. Fantastic. If you look at the sodium in that, it's outrageous. If you, and don't ask me how I know this, but there's a macaroni and cheese box I mentioned before. If you ate the whole box, it's 3,500 milligrams of sodium for that whole box of macaroni and cheese. If you look at pizza, all these other things, it's no wonder you're so thirsty, right, after you're done consuming these foods. It's because they're extraordinarily high in sodium. So you could have a quote-unquote healthy food that's a processed food, and you're still going to be incurring a ton of sodium. Now, if you're a heavy sweater, you're doing a lot of exercise, that 1,500 milligrams is probably too low. But if you're not very active and you're just trying to control your sodium levels and need to be under 50 milligrams, these package labels, these food labels, can be eye-openers to the fact that you might be consuming a lot more sodium than you think, especially if you're a processed food eater. These percentages, what's up with that? Well, these percentages are based upon a 2,000 calorie diet. So we're making an assumption here, you're eating 2,000 calories. And so in this particular case, the total fat is 6% of your daily value, so the DV up here, right, based on a 2,000 calorie diet. And so you'd have 6% of your total fat consumed for the day by eating this thing, or this food stuff. If you have 3,000 calorie diet, that number is going to be lower. If you have a 1,500 calorie diet, that number is going to be higher. I wouldn't get too excited about the percentages. They're not a bad thing to look at and give you just kind of a glimpse. Like you can see these sugars over here, right? That jumps out at you like 28%. Wow, that's a lot. It is, right? And so that kind of clue you into, well, how many grams? Was it 14? Oh, yeah, that's quite a bit of sugar. Probably need to go easy on this food, but not eat 15 of them, right? If you see, like some of these I saw a keto bar the other day. It was like 7 grams of sat fat in it, right? Just for that bar. I mean, you're already almost up to your full saturated fat in that one bar for the day. Okay, so the percentages are great. Just understand where they're coming from. I wouldn't get too excited about them. I wouldn't follow them too closely. Just kind of what I mentioned before. Use them as an initial cursory glance, and then look at the grams and understand where you should be. And well, how many grams of each one of these should I do? Okay, well we'll talk about that later, and it'll be based on how you're eating and what you're eating for. Okay, calories is going to be the main driver, of course, of losing weight and things like that. But how many grams of each one of these macros you get is going to be based on what you do. And I would encourage you to eat all the macros. I'm not a put in a diet person. I'm a whole foods diet, if you want to say anything. Person meaning eat all 3 macros, just know when to turn one up and down, the others down, perhaps at certain times if you're interested in sports nutrition or weight loss, etc. But you need all 3. Eat them, especially if you want to have the diet that you can sustain long term. Now, this little part of the panel, last thing is this bottom part with the vitamins and these micronutrients. This is, to me, one of the greatest lies on these panels. Because you look at this and you're like, sweet, I got 6% of my iron in. You may not understand what iron's used for, but you're like, well, 6% is pretty good, right? And potassium's at 2%. Wow, that's great. These percentages are nothing, right? I mean, 2%, 6%, 2%. Again, we're basing it on a 2,000 calorie diet, but it might as well be 0 like the vitamin D is over here. They just don't matter. Okay, so when you see those percentages, I wouldn't get too excited until they get at least 20%, if not higher. Okay, that's a nice food marketing ploy that's been on there, but you'll see these micros down here all the time, and they're, even products you're like, this should have a lot of vitamin C in it. It can help you evaluate it. It has none. Like one of these fruit drinks. It's a fruit drink with an orange on it. Wow, it's probably loaded with vitamin C. And you turn this over and it says vitamin C 2% or 0. Well, that should clue you in that the food is not, going to be a healthy one. All right, this other side of this food label, and again, these are arranged differently. A lot of times this panel is above the ingredient list. But you have your ingredient list here, and you can see there's a lot of ingredients. And there's been some talk about, well, the longer the ingredient is, the less, more concerning it is. And that may or may not be true. The reason it just depends on how you feel about food additives. So obviously this food is processed and full of a lot of food additives. And so, if you're okay with these food additives, you trust the government, in the GRAS, GRAS, generally regarded as safe with most of these are, then don't worry about it. But if you are a person that is concerned about food additives, and the longer the list is, then you probably should be concerned with how many, non-natural, whatever that means anymore, things are in this. This is natural flavor there, and it's citric acid, right? That must be just natural. The organization of this ingredient list is important. The first thing on this ingredient list, it's an order of, and let me just say this, is an order of the most amount of the food, of the ingredient in the food. So in other words, brown rice syrup is by weight the most plentiful ingredient in this food. Citric acid is the least plentiful. Okay. So if you follow the list here: brown rice syrup, fig paste, gluten-free flour, cane sugar, canola oil, blueberry jam, so on and so forth. You're getting less and less of each one of those as you go. It doesn't tell you how much is by percentage, but it just tells you in order of which one of these foods, which one of these ingredients, is the most plentiful down to the least plentiful. All right. So if you're trying to evaluate a food, and again, if you're drinking a fruit drink and the first ingredient is sugar, that might cause you some concern if you thought it was going to be actual, from fruit. Okay. These other little marketing things down here, like dairy-free, vegan, kosher, low sodium, whole grain. Gluten-free. We'll talk about these as we go. Some of these are useful, like knowing this is low sodium is great. But 75 milligrams, it isn't that high, so I would agree with that. But that doesn't make this product healthy. It's just telling you there's a little sodium, right? If you're on a vegan diet, this could be helpful information. Or if you're trying to avoid dairy for whatever reason, you're lactose intolerant, or you just want to avoid it, period. This can be helpful information. But a lot of these things are promoted, you have to realize, like gluten-free especially, as health items, and they're not. It's just information. It doesn't mean they're healthy. Okay, and food companies are brilliant at taking some of these things in consumerism that have been used to help inform you as a consumer to make good food choices, and actually bend them into good food marketing tactics. Gluten-free being one of them. There's some that actually need to have gluten-free products, but those that actually have celiac disease are a lot smaller percentage than we think. So anyway, just some basics. There's other things that we could talk about here, but when you flip one of these over, and you might see something high in saturated fat and have no protein in it or have no fiber. I mean, those should be red flags immediately. If something that's a little bit, quote unquote, more helpful, and again, I don't want to use the word healthy because you have to evaluate the whole food, but a little more helpful might be something that's higher in fiber and protein. That would probably be something that would kill hunger and help to keep hunger under control so you don't eat so much. Okay, something that's high in sodium, you need to evaluate if you're an athlete or not, or somebody who's training quite a bit. That might be okay. For some of you, might not. Saturated fat, trans fat are ones we should avoid. Healthy fat is a good thing, but even if it has too many calories, can be problematic. Okay, look for the sugar amount and look, the fiber to sugar ratio and the fiber to protein ratio. So if you have something with high in protein but no fiber in it, that might be okay. But if it has a bunch of sugar in it, it might be sliding down the list as a healthier food choice. If something has high fiber and high protein, that's probably a good thing, right? Like I mentioned before. If it has high sugar and neither high fiber or high protein, that's going to be problematic. So this food is kind of peddled as a quasi-healthy food, and I would say it's more of a dessert. Right? It does have complex carbohydrates in it, but it doesn't have very much fiber in it or protein, and it has a lot of sugar in it. For 210 calories, it has a lot of sugar in it. The good news is it doesn't have a lot of saturated fat or sodium. So again, I wouldn't call this a health food by any means. It's just a probably healthier bad food dessert choice. All right, so you want to just pound these all day long, and thinking that you're eating something healthier than a candy bar, because it's just kind of a little bit healthier choice of a candy bar. But I mentioned before, if you're looking at a candy bar and comparing it to this, and you think, well, this is a little better, no fat, less sugar compared to the candy bar, and at least it has some fiber in it. This could be a better choice. Maybe the calories are lower, maybe it's 50 calories lower than the candy bar you're looking at. This could be a better choice. It's not a healthy choice, but it's a better choice. And those better choices over time, can add up. If you save 300 calories a day by making better choices, you're going to lose some weight. Okay? So, just a little food label lesson to get us started, and we'll go from there into our next video. We'll start talking about some training concepts, nutritional concepts, and again, make sure you look at that post and let me know what you'd like to hear more about.